Have you ever looked someone in the eye and sensed they weren't showing you the full picture? Like something behind their smile didn't match their words? Nietzsche warned us, people don't speak from truth, they speak from survival. Words are often armor, smiles, performances. The real story hides in what's unsaid. In a world obsessed with appearances, we're trained to listen to language. But Stoics and Nietzsche teach us to listen to patterns, silences, tension, and fear. People wear masks not to deceive you, but to protect themselves. And if you know what to look for, you'll see straight through them. This video reveals 10 brutal psychological truths, tools to decode human behavior through clarity, not judgment. From the lies people tell themselves, to the pain behind confidence, to the childhood wounds that still direct their adult lives. What you'll learn here will change how you see everyone. If you're ready to stop being fooled by charm and start seeing through the mask, like this video and subscribe. This channel is here to help you reclaim your clarity, one truth at a time.
Number 1.
Everyone wears a mask to survive. No one shows up in the world entirely raw. From the moment we step into society, we begin constructing a version of ourselves designed not for truth, but for safety. We perform to be accepted. We edit ourselves to avoid rejection. Over time, this performance hardens into personality, and Nietzsche, with his usual sharpness, saw straight through it. He believed most people are not expressing who they are. They're expressing who they think they need to be in order to survive. The Stoics understood this too, though from a different angle. Epictetus reminded us, you are not your role, you are a soul playing a part. We play the role of the successful professional, the agreeable friend, the supportive partner, but deep down we're just trying to be safe. We're trying to avoid shame, avoid pain, avoid the feeling of being too much or not enough. So the mask becomes our protection, but if we wear it too long, it becomes a cage. Now, this mask isn't always a sign of deception. It's often a sign of pain. People don't wear masks to manipulate you. They wear them to protect the tender parts of themselves that have been bruised one too many times. Think about someone who constantly makes jokes even in serious moments. That isn't just humor, it's armor, or someone who always agrees with everyone in the room. That's not kindness, it's fear of being disliked. Nietzsche wrote, every profound spirit needs a mask. And he was right, but the problem is, most people forget they're wearing one. They think their mask is who they are. They forget what's underneath. And here's where the Stoic practice of observation becomes a superpower. Marcus Aurelius said, look within. Within is the fountain of good, and it will ever bubble up if thou wilt ever dig. When you observe people deeply, not with judgment, but with presence, you begin to see what their mask is made of. You see it in the way they avoid certain topics, in how they shift their posture when praised or criticized, in how they speak louder when they're uncertain, and go quiet when they're ashamed. To see someone clearly, ask yourself, what are they afraid would happen if they showed who they really are? That question alone will reveal more than any confession ever could. Take Frida Kahlo as an example. In public, she was loud, bold, unshaken, but her paintings revealed the ache she rarely put into words. Suffering, longing, isolation. Her brush spoke where her voice could not. Her mask helped her function, but her art let her bleed. But don't stop there. The real Stoic challenge is this. Can you see your own mask? Because we all wear one. Even the person who claims to always keep it real is performing a version of truth. Seneca said, self-deception is the most dangerous lie. Before we seek to read others, we must learn to read ourselves. Where do we perform? Where do we hide? What parts of ourselves have we deemed unworthy of daylight? So the next time someone seems too proud, too passive, too perfect, don't react, watch, listen, not to their words, but to their discomfort, that's where the truth lives. Behind every mask is a scared child who learned it was safer to pretend. And once you understand that, you stop taking things so personally. You stop needing people to be raw and open with you, because you know they're doing their best to feel safe in a world that's rarely safe for anyone. You stop reading their words and start reading their silence.
Number 2.
What someone hates in others reveals what they hide in themselves. When someone reacts with strong disgust, rage, or judgment toward a specific trait in another person, look closer. That emotion may not be about the other person at all. It may be a window into the parts of themselves they've buried, denied, or failed to make peace with. Nietzsche captured this truth with piercing clarity when he said, "He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster." But often we're not just fighting monsters out there. We're fighting the ones within. This is the psychological mechanism known as projection. What we cannot accept in ourselves, we exile. But the psyche does not forget. What we bury doesn't vanish. It seeks expression, often through judgment. If you want to understand someone's unconscious struggles, watch what triggers them. If they lash out at arrogance, ask whether they're secretly afraid of their own need to feel important. If they despise dishonesty, ask whether they've betrayed their own values in silence. Harsh judgment is rarely objective. It's a disguised confession. The Stoics warned about this tendency long before modern psychology gave it a name. Marcus Aurelius advised, "Whenever you are about to find fault with someone, ask yourself the following question. What fault of mine most nearly resembles the one I'm about to criticize?" That single question forces us into radical honesty. It breaks the illusion that we are always on the side of truth and reminds us that much of our anger is about something we've yet to resolve inside. Consider Carl Jung, one of the most important psychological thinkers of the 20th century. He developed the idea of the shadow, the part of ourselves we disown because it threatens our ideal self-image. The shadow doesn't disappear, it projects itself onto others. If you pride yourself on being humble, you might find yourself disproportionately upset by someone else's confidence. Not because it's wrong, but because it challenges your identity. What we hate is often what we secretly envy, or what we fear lives within us. And this isn't just theory. It plays out in real people. Take Howard Hughes, the brilliant entrepreneur and film producer. Publicly, he condemned excess, germs, and emotional vulnerability, but his life slowly unraveled as he spiraled into obsession, isolation, and compulsive control. The things he criticized most were the very forces consuming him from the inside out. His hatred of disorder revealed a mind deeply at war with itself. Now, why does this matter? Because until you understand projection, you'll waste energy fighting illusions. You'll chase enemies that are actually mirrors. You'll condemn others not for who they are, but for what they remind you of, Seneca warned. We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality. In other words, our inner war creates external conflict. To read someone clearly, ask, what do they consistently criticize? Then ask, what would they be afraid to admit they've done or desired? You'll start seeing patterns. The person who shames others for needing attention might secretly crave it. The one who calls everyone fake might be performing the hardest. The more aggressive the judgment, the more likely it's about something personal. But the Stoic way isn't just to observe others, it's to turn the lens inward. When you catch yourself irritated by someone's pride, dishonesty, or neediness, pause, ask, what part of me feels exposed by their behavior? This doesn't excuse anyone's actions, but it frees you. It transforms moments of judgment into opportunities for clarity. Because here's the truth. What we hate most in others is often a disguised cry from a part of ourselves that still feels unloved. And if we're brave enough to admit that, we not only understand others better, we finally begin to understand ourselves.
Number 3.
Silence reveals more than words. In a world addicted to noise, silence is uncomfortable. We rush to fill it, we fear it. But Nietzsche reminds us that silence isn't empty. It's loaded. It is in the pauses, the hesitations, the unsaid, where a person's truth often leaks out. People rehearse their words, but they can't always control their silences. And this is why silence, when read correctly, can reveal far more than any performance. The Stoics understood the language of restraint. Epictetus said, "Nature gave us one tongue and two ears so we could hear twice as much as we speak." That wasn't just advice for good conversation, it was a strategy for understanding. When you watch how someone reacts in silence, you see where their fears live. You see what questions make them nervous. You see where they go blank. Not because they don't know the answer, but because the answer touches something raw. Someone might speak confidently about their career, but go quiet when asked about their childhood. Someone might offer well-rehearsed opinions on love, but stumble when asked if they feel truly loved. These aren't flaws in communication. They are data points. They show you where the soul is still wounded, where the armor slips, where the truth trembles beneath the surface. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled an empire and yet wrote for himself alone, often reflected in his journal on the importance of inner stillness. The nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength, he wrote. In other words, calm isn't weakness, it's control. But the opposite is also true. When someone becomes agitated, flustered, or overly polished in their silence, it often means they're trying to suppress a truth they fear will escape. A perfect example is Anthony Bourdain. His charisma, wit, and insight made him seem like a man fully in command. But listen to the spaces between his words, the long pauses, the subtle sighs, the heaviness that crept into his voice when discussing meaning or regret. The silence was not emptiness, it was density. It was life experience that had nowhere else to go. And it told a story louder than anything he ever said on camera. To read someone, you have to train yourself to stop filling the gaps. Let their silences breathe. Observe what topics make them shift in tone, where they go vague, where they try to distract or deflect. The person who quickly laughs off a serious question may not be dishonest. They may just be in pain. Pain rarely announces itself directly. It hides behind delays, overcompensations, and awkward transitions. And here's the trap. If you only pay attention to what people say, you will miss what they are. Because words can be curated, stories can be rehearsed, but silence is spontaneous. It can't lie easily, and that's why it's sacred to the Stoic observer. Seneca said, "Speech is the mirror of the mind." But just as a mirror shows only the surface, speech often reveals only the conscious. If you want to know the subconscious, the fear, the shame, the desire, you have to look underneath the noise. That's where silence lives. And perhaps most importantly, learn to become comfortable with your own silence. If another person's silence makes you anxious, it might be exposing your need to control the moment, your need to be liked, your fear of stillness. As the Stoics taught, peace is not found by controlling others. It's found by observing, accepting, and understanding what is. So when someone goes quiet, don't panic. Don't rush in to rescue them from the discomfort. Stay present, because in that silence, you are hearing something deeper than words. Something raw, human, and real.
Number 4.
Excessive virtue is often disguised vanity. When someone loudly proclaims how moral, honest, or selfless they are, pause, listen not to their words but to what they're trying to prove. Because often, the louder the virtue, the more desperate the performance. Nietzsche warned us about this subtle form of self-deception. He wrote, "Whenever I climb, I am followed by a dog called ego. Even in our noblest efforts, the need to be recognized can corrupt the purity of our actions. The Stoics saw this clearly, Marcus Aurelius cautioned. Don't go around proclaiming how virtuous you are, just be it. That's the core of real virtue. It operates quietly, steadily, and without applause. But in today's world, especially where every act can be posted, shared, and praised, virtue often becomes theater. People don't just do good, they perform it. And behind that performance, Nietzsche believed, often hides a thirst for control, admiration, or superiority. This isn't merely about hypocrisy, it's about motivation. A person may donate money, speak of justice, or defend the weak. But the question is why? Is it coming from compassion or from the desire to be seen as compassionate? Is the act rooted in truth or in image? The Stoics demanded we confront this inner tension. Seneca said, "The greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, wasting today in pursuit of tomorrow." Expectancy is not just about time, it's about recognition. If you do good and expect praise, your virtue is no longer pure, it's transactional. We see this play out in real life with painful clarity. Consider Elizabeth Holmes, the founder of Theranos. She positioned herself as a hero in healthcare, dedicated to revolutionizing blood testing and saving lives. Her message was filled with buzzwords of ethics, responsibility, and innovation. But underneath that image was manipulation, fraud, and an obsessive need to appear visionary. Her downfall wasn't just about lies. It was about using virtue as camouflage for ambition. True virtue, by contrast, is invisible until tested. Think of Fred Rogers, better known as Mr. Rogers. His kindness was never loud. He didn't declare his goodness. He lived it. He wrote his own scripts, responded personally to letters from children, and remained the same off camera as he was on it. His power came not from performing virtue, but from embodying it when no one was watching. And here's the deeper truth. Excessive virtue is often an unconscious reaction to shame. People may overcompensate with morality because they're trying to bury a part of themselves they fear is unworthy. So they cling to being the good one, the honest one, the generous one. Not because they are those things effortlessly, but because they fear what might emerge if they stop performing. So how do we read others and ourselves through this lens? Watch not what people say about their values, but how they behave under pressure. Do they admit when they're wrong without spinning a moral story? Do they act generously when it's inconvenient? Do they serve others when no one's watching? These are the moments where real character speaks. But the deepest work is internal. The Stoic path always turns inward. Ask yourself, where am I clinging to a good image instead of a good heart? Where do I seek to be admired more than to be aligned? These questions are not easy, but they liberate. Because once you stop needing to appear good, you can finally focus on simply being it. Nietzsche didn't ask us to abandon virtue. He asked us to interrogate it, to peel back its layers and see what drives it. The Stoics agreed, what matters is the soul, not the show. So next time someone projects their morality loudly, don't assume they're lying, but do wonder what they're trying to cover, because real virtue doesn't demand attention. It doesn't need to perform. It doesn't sparkle. It endures. It is quiet. It is consistent, and it is enough.
Number 5.
People lie to themselves first. Before someone lies to you, they've already rehearsed the lie within themselves 1,000 times. It's not always malicious, in fact. Most of the time, it's protective, because the truth, unfiltered and raw, is often too much for the ego to carry. Nietzsche once said, "We have art so that we do not die of the truth." He wasn't being poetic. He was being brutally honest. People create stories, soften edges, and distort reality because the unvarnished truth threatens their entire sense of self. And this is where Stoicism offers a piercing contrast. The Stoics did not fear truth. They trained themselves to stare at it, calmly, clearly, without illusion. Marcus Aurelius urged, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change, for I seek the truth, by which no one was ever truly harmed." That's the key. Truth doesn't hurt us. Our resistance to it does. The lies we tell ourselves to avoid pain are the very things that end up deepening our suffering. But why do people lie to themselves? Because facing the truth often means confronting regret, admitting fault, or accepting that their narrative, the one they've clung to for years, is incomplete. And that's terrifying. So they rationalize, they turn betrayals into boundaries, avoidance into peace, and selfishness into self-love. It's not that they're trying to deceive others. They're trying to survive the weight of their own guilt or grief. Take the story of Lance Armstrong. For years, he presented himself as a symbol of resilience and triumph, beating cancer, winning Tour de France titles, becoming a global icon. But underneath was a web of denial and deception. And while the public scandal focused on his lies to the world, the deeper tragedy was his lie to himself. He convinced himself that he was still the hero, still justified, still clean, enough. That internal narrative became his shield until it shattered. Now, from the outside, these lies can seem obvious, but when you're inside them, they feel like the only way to breathe. This is why Stoic practice emphasizes self-examination over self-image. Seneca said, "The first step towards amendment is the recognition of error." The moment you see the lie, you can begin the work of returning to what's real, not as punishment, but as liberation. So how do you read someone through this lens? Watch for the patterns. When someone avoids responsibility, blames everyone else, or repeats stories that always cast them as the victim or the saint, they're likely protecting a part of themselves they feel is unlovable. When their actions don't match their explanations, it's not always manipulation. Often, it's confusion. They're lost in the story they've told themselves, and now they need it to be true just to function. But again, the real work begins with you. What lies have you rehearsed so long they now feel like facts? What parts of your story are still shaped by fear, ego, or the need to look good? These questions are uncomfortable, but they are the gateway to clarity. The Stoics didn't promise comfort. They promised reality, and reality, once embraced, makes you powerful. Nietzsche believed that the deepest truths are not taught, they are remembered, and often we remember them in moments of quiet shame, failure, or awakening. That's where growth begins, not in performance, but in the breakdown of illusions. So when someone lies to you, look deeper, not with anger, but with understanding, because chances are they've already lied to themselves. The betrayal didn't start with you. It started the moment they chose a story over their soul. And when you understand that, you stop being wounded by their words and start seeing the pain that wrote them. Number 6, where someone feels superior, they are hiding inferiority. Confidence doesn't shout, it doesn't need to. When someone boasts about their intelligence, dominance, or success, they're often not expressing strength. They're hiding something. Nietzsche once wrote, "All idealism is mendacity in the face of what one is afraid to see." That fear often shows up as performance. When a person needs to feel above others, they are usually trying to escape the shame of once feeling beneath them. The Stoics would call this a false elevation of the self. True greatness, to them, wasn't about ranking higher. It was about needing no rank at all. Epictetus warned, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." That's not humility for the sake of image. That's freedom. Freedom from needing to dominate. Freedom from needing to impress. Because when you're whole inside, you don't measure yourself by how small you can make others feel. But modern culture feeds the opposite impulse. We are taught that to be someone, you must prove it constantly, online, in conversation, in posture. And so people inflate, they exaggerate their wins, they interrupt others to remind you of their importance, they drop names, titles, numbers, but all of it, the grandiosity, the competition, the defensiveness, is not a signal of strength. It's the shadow of inferiority whispering, if I don't prove myself, I'll be forgotten. Take Steve Jobs, for example. In his early years, he was known for his obsession with control, perfection, and being the smartest person in the room. But beneath that bravado was a wound. He had been abandoned by his birth parents, struggled with identity, and spent years proving that he was worthy of significance. His intensity wasn't just vision, it was pain. Later in life, those edges softened. He became quieter, more reflective, because true power eventually lets go of performance. Similarly, many high achievers carry a wound they rarely speak about. They don't climb just for ambition. They climb to escape the voice that once told them they weren't enough. The applause helps drown out the echo of shame, but it never truly silences it. And that's why superiority, when it's loud and persistent, often marks a person still running from a hidden deficit. The Stoics were radically uninterested in external validation. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the world at his time, wrote privately, "Ambition means tying your well-being to what other people say or do. Self-indulgence means tying it to the things that happen to you. But sanity means tying it to your own actions." That is real superiority, not over others, but over your own impulses. So how do we read someone through this lens? Watch how they handle being ignored. Do they become louder? Defensive? Do they need constant recognition? Or can they sit in quiet rooms without shrinking? Watch how they treat people with no power. If someone only shows confidence when they're in control, that's not confidence. It's performance under pressure. Real security doesn't spike when praised. It stays level when unseen. But once again, the hardest work is internal. Ask yourself, where do I feel the need to be above others? Where do I exaggerate, compete, or perform? The Stoics believe that pride is the last illusion we must overcome, because the desire to feel superior is often a reaction to feeling unworthy somewhere deep beneath the surface. Nietzsche never encouraged us to suppress our ambition, but he warned us not to mistake dominance for depth. Power without self-awareness becomes a mask, and eventually that mask becomes suffocating. So next time someone dominates a room, brags about their accomplishments, or speaks as if they are above error, don't be intimidated, be observant. Ask, what are they trying to outrun? Because often where someone feels most superior is exactly where they feel most insecure. And once you can see that, their performance no longer confuses you, it reveals them. Number 7, most actions are driven by unconscious fear. On the surface, people look composed, rational, and control. But beneath the surface, most of their actions are driven not by logic, but by fear. Fear of being rejected, fear of being forgotten, fear of not being enough. And because that fear is often unconscious, it drives behavior in quiet, destructive ways. Nietzsche once wrote, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster." But what happens when the monster isn't another person, but an inner fear that was never addressed? The Stoics taught that fear is not something to be eliminated, but something to be understood. Marcus Aurelius noted, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment." In other words, we suffer not from events, but from the meaning we assign to them. And that meaning is often shaped by unconscious fear. Let's make this concrete. When someone constantly over-explains themselves, it's rarely about the listener. It's about the fear of being misunderstood or judged. When someone is obsessed with being liked, it's often driven by a deeper fear of abandonment. When someone becomes controlling, rigid, or emotionally distant, it's not because they don't care. It's because they are terrified of vulnerability. These behaviors are not flaws. They are defense mechanisms built to protect old wounds. A perfect example of this is Howard Hughes. As a brilliant businessman and film producer, Hughes was outwardly successful, but internally he was ruled by fear. Fear of germs, fear of losing control, fear of being exposed. Over time, his life became smaller, more controlled, more isolated. His brilliance was real, but so was his fear, and as that fear deepened, it didn't just shape his habits, it shaped his reality. This is why the Stoics place such a high value on introspection, Seneca wrote. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Our fears, when left unexamined, become the architects of our actions. They distort our perception, influence our tone, and make us reactive instead of wise. And worst of all, they make us believe our reactions are truth. So how do you read someone through this lens? Simple, ask. What are they afraid of losing? When someone reacts harshly to criticism, they may fear the loss of respect. When someone becomes anxious in silence, they may fear being forgotten. When someone works endlessly without rest, they may fear being deemed worthless if they ever stop. Fear isn't always loud. Sometimes it shows up as perfectionism, people-pleasing, or endless busyness. But again, the deeper work is personal. Ask yourself, what am I unconsciously afraid of losing? Is it control, approval, safety? If your nervous system is constantly on alert, it's a sign your inner world feels unstable. The Stoics didn't teach emotional suppression. They taught emotional awareness, to observe your fear, to understand its origin, to separate the story from the truth. Nietzsche believed that only when we confront the inner chaos can we build a strong self. He wasn't asking us to pretend to be fearless. He was asking us to become fearless by facing the thing that keeps us small. So next time you see someone overreact, withdraw, boast, or overcompensate, don't dismiss it as weakness. See it for what it is, a signal, a sign of fear running the show. And instead of taking it personally, use it as insight. Because the more you understand fear, the less power it has over you, and the more compassion you develop for others and for yourself. Number 8. When someone criticizes too much, it's projection. There's a difference between giving feedback and constantly finding fault. When a person is always pointing out what's wrong in others, what's fake, what's flawed, what's broken, it's not usually a sign of insight, it's a signal of projection. Nietzsche once said, "Distrust all in whom the impulse to punish is powerful." In other words, the harshest critics are often trying to destroy something in others that they can't confront in themselves. Projection is the ego's defense mechanism. When we're unable to accept parts of ourselves, our envy, our insecurity, our fear, we unconsciously cast those qualities onto others. It's easier to attack someone else's arrogance than admit our own desire to feel important. It's safer to accuse someone of dishonesty than to deal with the ways we betrayed our own values. The Stoics understood this reflex. Marcus Aurelius warned, whenever you are about to find fault with someone, ask yourself the following question. What fault of mine most nearly resembles the one I'm about to criticize? Criticism often reveals more about the speaker than the target. A person who constantly accuses others of being disloyal may be wrestling with their own disconnection from integrity. Someone who calls everyone fake might be the one performing the hardest. The louder the judgment, the more likely it's masking something raw and unresolved. Consider the case of James Cameron, the visionary director behind Titanic and Avatar. Early in his career, he was known for being ruthlessly critical on set. Harsh, controlling, quick to tear down others' ideas. But underneath that behavior was a deep fear of failure, of not living up to his own perfectionism. His criticism wasn't about the people around him, it was about the part of himself that felt never good enough. Over time, as he matured, his leadership evolved. He became more collaborative. Why? Because the fear that fueled his criticism had been seen, named, and gradually released. Now, this doesn't mean all criticism is projection. Honest feedback, when offered with humility and clarity, is a gift. But when judgment is constant, aggressive, or disproportionate, it's no longer about truth, it's about disowned pain. And if you pay attention, you'll notice that chronic critics have patterns. They attack the same qualities again and again, often without reflection or nuance. They're not observing, they're projecting. This is why Stoic training begins with the self, Seneca wrote. It is a great thing to know the season for speech and the season for silence. When we learn to pause before judging, we create space to examine whether our reaction is truly about the other person, or if it's a mirror. That space is where wisdom begins. So how do we read someone through this lens? Watch where their criticism concentrates. Is it always about people being weak, dishonest, attention-seeking, disloyal? Then ask, what would it mean if they secretly feared being all those things themselves? What are they fighting in others that they haven't yet accepted in themselves? And again, the real challenge is inward. Where do you criticize harshly? Where do you feel the urge to correct, condemn, or dismiss others, especially when it's not necessary? The Stoic path isn't about silencing all judgment. It's about refining it, aligning it with self-awareness, turning it into something constructive rather than compulsive. Nietzsche didn't write to make us suspicious of others. He wrote to awaken us, to make us alert to the hidden motives behind our reactions. And the Stoics, with their calm discipline, taught us what to do with that awareness. To return to ourselves, to examine first, speak later, to replace harshness with clarity and projection with presence. So the next time someone criticizes you or everyone else, don't just hear the words, hear the pain behind them, hear the self they're afraid to see. Because when you stop reacting to the criticism and start reading it, you gain something rare, emotional immunity. And that, the Stoics would say, is the beginning of real strength. Number 9, guilt hides behind false confidence. When someone speaks with unwavering certainty, dismisses all criticism, and seems immune to doubt, don't assume they are strong. In many cases, this kind of confidence is a mask, not a reflection of truth, but a defense against guilt. Nietzsche once wrote, "Convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies." He understood that when someone clings too tightly to being right, it's often because they're terrified of confronting where they went wrong. The Stoics knew that peace and confidence were not found in performance, but in clarity. Marcus Aurelius observed, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject." Real confidence isn't loud. It doesn't need to dominate. It doesn't tremble in the face of disagreement. But false confidence is fragile. It must silence dissent, overcompensate with certainty, and protect an image that is already cracking beneath the surface. This is how guilt hides. It doesn't always show up in sadness or shame. Sometimes it comes dressed in overcorrection, in over-explaining, in someone trying too hard to appear composed, wise, or beyond reproach. Because to admit guilt, to truly face it, would mean confronting a version of themselves they've worked hard to bury. And that's terrifying. Take the example of Martha Stewart. After being convicted for insider trading, her initial public responses were defensive and controlled. The persona that once represented domestic perfection became sharp-edged and guarded. She denied wrongdoing, maintained her version of the story, and clung to her reputation. But with time and distance, she changed. She accepted what happened, allowed herself to be imperfect, and returned with a quieter, more grounded strength. Her transformation didn't come from doubling down on confidence. It came from facing the guilt beneath it. So how do we read this in others? Watch for inflexibility, for the person who cannot admit fault, even in the smallest things, for the person who constantly defends themselves before anyone has even criticized them, or the one who rewrites past failures into selective memories where they are always justified. These are not signs of peace. They are symptoms of unresolved guilt. But here's the harder question. Where are you doing the same? Where have you traded self-honesty for image control? Where have you rehearsed a story so often that even you believe it, because the truth is still too heavy to hold? The Stoic path calls for radical responsibility, not to punish yourself, but to free yourself, to stop hiding from the version of you that made mistakes, to meet that version with clarity, not shame. Nietzsche didn't ask us to distrust all conviction. He asked us to question the motive behind it. Is your certainty anchored in reality, or is it covering up regret? Is your calmness genuine, or is it rehearsed? So the next time someone insists they've moved on, but they can't stop proving it, pause. The next time they act unshakable, but can't tolerate disagreement, observe. That confidence might not be peace, it might be armor, and beneath that armor may be a guilt that's never been fully faced. And once you see that, not just in them, but in yourself, you stop being fooled by appearances. You stop needing to prove. You stop performing peace. And in that stillness, you finally start to live it. Number 10, people betray themselves through exaggeration. The moment someone says, "I don't care what anyone thinks," or "I'm always happy," listen closely. Not to the words, but to what those words are running from. Extreme statements are rarely reflections of truth. They are more often defenses, overcompensations. Nietzsche captured this beautifully when he said, "The need to lie is rooted in a sense of weakness." And one of the most seductive lies we tell is exaggeration. Not to deceive others, but to protect ourselves from vulnerability. The Stoics understood that balance is truth. Anything that leans too far in one direction is usually a reaction to fear, not a product of clarity, Epictetus taught. It is not things that disturb us, but our interpretation of them. When someone clings to extremes, it reveals their discomfort with nuance. They don't just want to be heard, they want to drown out the feeling they're avoiding. Take the example of someone who constantly says, "I'm fine. I always figure it out." That may sound resilient, but if it's repeated often, and especially when said with tension, it's likely masking exhaustion. Or someone who says, "I trust no one," may sound tough, but more often that sentence is spoken by someone who once trusted too deeply and got hurt. Exaggeration is the voice of someone trying to regain control after feeling powerless. Consider Kanye West, known for his musical brilliance and bold innovation. He's also known for extreme public declarations, comparing himself to gods, claiming absolute genius, declaring total self-belief. But behind those declarations lives a deeper story of instability, of pain, of a man wrestling with his identity in public. His exaggerations weren't confidence, they were cries, signals of emotional chaos leaking through the language of self-protection. The Stoics would not judge this. They would analyze it. They would ask, what fear is this exaggeration trying to bury? Seneca once wrote, "He who boasts of his ancestry praises the deeds of another." And the same logic applies here. The person who constantly boasts about strength, peace, or certainty is often trying to silence their inner doubt. The more dramatic the declaration, the more fragile the truth behind it. So how do we read exaggeration in others? First, observe patterns. Are their statements always absolute? Do they use phrases like everyone, never, always, or nothing affects me? These aren't reflections of clarity, they're shields, Psychological armor that suggests, if I say it strongly enough, maybe I won't feel the opposite. But of course, the opposite still lingers, and it leaks out, in tone, in body language, in contradiction. And as always, the Stoic lens turns inward. Where are you exaggerating to protect yourself? Do you insist you've moved on while avoiding silence? Do you say, I don't need anyone because needing others once brought pain? These statements may feel empowering, but often they're ways of bypassing emotional truth. And what the Stoics wanted was not just truth in logic, but truth in living. Nietzsche didn't want us to suppress emotion. He wanted us to outgrow illusion, and exaggeration is one of the most subtle illusions of all. It makes us feel safe for a moment, but it disconnects us from the quiet, grounded clarity that real growth requires. So the next time someone tells you a story that sounds too absolute, too perfect, too detached, too invincible, pause, not to judge, but to understand. What feeling are they trying to silence? What truth would hurt too much to say softly, so they've chosen to shout the opposite? Once you begin to hear exaggeration as a whisper of fear rather than a sign of strength, the performance loses its grip on you, and more importantly, you stop performing it yourself. You trade extremes for honesty, noise for stillness, and illusion for peace. Most people are not trying to deceive you. They're trying to protect themselves behind the mask, behind the silence. Behind the exaggeration is a human being shaped by fear, pain, and memory. Nietzsche gave us the raw lens to see through illusion. The Stoics gave us the inner stillness to face it without flinching. Together, they teach us that to read others is not to judge them, but to understand the silent battles they carry. And if you've seen pieces of yourself in these truths, good. That's where the real work begins, not outside, but within. Because once you recognize your own patterns, you stop reacting, you start observing. And slowly, clarity replaces confusion. If this video helped you understand human nature in a deeper way, give it a like and make sure you're subscribed. We're just getting started on this journey of self-awareness, strategy, and Stoic strength. Until next time, stay grounded, stay sharp, and stay true.